I talk about abandoned lines and stations quite a bit around here, and while looking into something completely unrelated, I found myself idly wondering, how many abandoned underground lines are there? The short answer is, not very many. London Underground is reluctant to throw anything away, and there are no underused tube lines these days. What's more likely is that a line gets handed over to a different operator, or becomes part of a different line. So I'm going to be broadening the definition of what counts as an underground line and what counts as abandoned. I'm not going to count anything that's still a tube line, so, for instance, the line to Stanmore is no longer part of the Bakerloo line, but it is part of the Jubilee line. But, no, you know what, let's just do this thing. We'll begin with the Metropolitan line beyond Amersham. The Metropolitan line used to go an awfully long way out of London, all the way to Verney Junction. And if you're wondering where Verney Junction is, so were the Metropolitan Railway. The name Verney Junction comes from Sir Harry Verney, who was a director of the Aylesbury and Buckingham Railway. There was nothing around here to name the station after. The only reason it existed was because it was a convenient place to build a junction with the London and North Western Railway. The Metropolitan Railway took the Aylesbury and Buckingham over in 1891. When London Transport took the Metropolitan over in 1933, they quickly decided that it was not within their remit to be running trains 50 miles out of London. And so, in 1936, they stopped running services out here. The Brill branch is a similar story. It was probably the least underground-y underground line ever built. It was originally a private railway opened in 1871. In 1872 it was opened to the public. It operated as a light railway until 1894, when it was also taken over by the Metropolitan Railway. The Brill branch met the Aylesbury and Buckingham at Quainton Road. At that time there was an idea that it could be extended all the way to Oxford, which is a heck of a thing to think about. The Metropolitan did no such thing, but instead operated it as a weird little backwater, where a typical passenger train would consist of an elderly steam locomotive and a single wooden coach, perhaps with some goods wagons coupled on. If London Transport didn't think Verney Junction was worth serving, they definitely didn't think this impoverished little line was worth serving, and in 1935 it was closed. After 1935, Metropolitan services only ran as far as Aylesbury. Now, only seems like a weird thing to say, given that that's far beyond the end of current Metropolitan services. Nevertheless, it was a long way short of the fullest extent of the Met's empire. It was electrification that doomed the Aylesbury service. When the Metropolitan Railway was built, it was steam-powered. Electrification was a gradual process. It was decided at the beginning of the 1960s that electrification would only go as far as Amersham. Everything that wasn't electrified beyond that would be handed over to British Railways. And so, from 1961, services beyond Amersham ended. While we're on the subject of the Metropolitan line, we should talk about the East London line. This opened as the East London Railway in 1869 using the abandoned Thames Tunnel between Rotherhithe and Wapping. The entire route was completed in 1884. It wasn't originally an underground railway per se. It was a joint venture between several different railways, including the Metropolitan Railway and the Metropolitan District Railway, what's now the District Line. Those two companies began running services over the line from 1884. It officially became an underground line in 1933. From 1933 to 1991 it was considered to be a branch of the Metropolitan line, although to all intents and purposes it was separate. In 1991 it officially became a separate line, with its own colour on the map. But it didn't even keep that identity for 20 years before it was taken over by the London Overground in 2010. It's now part of the Windrush line. Our next one might be a Metropolitan line branch, or it may be a Hammersmith and City line branch, depending how you view these things. The Hammersmith and City line was another line that was considered to be part of the Metropolitan until 1991, when it gained its lovely salmon pink colour. This branch was built in 1864 at the same time as the rest of the Hammersmith and City line. It came off the main line, so to speak, near Latimer Road and joined the West London Railway. It then ran down to what's now Kensington Olympia, but back then was Addison Road. While the line was a useful connection, it was never particularly popular in itself. In 1940, a number of air raids on the line gave London Transport the excuse they needed to close it down. The West London line is now part of the Overground, specifically the Mildmay line. The connection no longer exists. That's enough from the Metropolitan line. How about the District? Well, most of the track that's no longer part of the District is now part of the Piccadilly line, so it's not really abandoned. But there was a weird little spur at Acton Town. In fact, you can still see the platform that served it. This was a half-mile branch to South Acton that opened in 1905. The idea behind this was that other railway companies could use it to run trains between the District Railway and the North London Railway. But the District did run trains of their own, from South Acton to Hounslow Barracks and South Harrow. But it was never particularly popular, and from 1932 the whole thing was reduced to a short shuttle, travelling the length of the branch itself. The service was so little used that a single carriage was all that was needed, and the journey was so short that staff nicknamed it the Tea Run. The idea being that if you put the kettle on at the start of the journey, it would have boiled by the time you got back. Anyway, the weird little line closed in 1959. Now on to the Northern Line, and the line from Borough to King William Street. The part of the Northern Line from Stockwell to King William Street was built by the City and South London Railway, and the original idea was that it would simply terminate here upon opening in 1890. I mean, why wouldn't it? It was the City and South London Railway. It was in the city, it was in South London, what more do you want? But then they changed their mind and decided to extend to Moorgate. One problem. The line was facing the wrong way at King William Street. So at Borough the line was diverted via London Bridge. King William Street and the tunnel under the river were abandoned. Interestingly, while the diversion was being planned, a company called the City and Brixton Railway announced plans to take the old route over and use it as part of a line to Brixton. Anyway, they couldn't raise the money, so that was the end of that. Some of the tunnels in and around the abandoned station are now used to provide ventilation for Bank. I don't know whether you'd count this as part of the Northern Line or part of the Metropolitan Line or what, but next we're going to look at the Northern City Line. This opened in 1904. It was originally supposed to provide a connection for the Great Northern Railway to enable them to run trains from their main line at Finsbury Park to Moorgate. However, the Great Northern Railway got cold feet at the last minute, and the result was a short and not very useful tube line that was large enough to hold main-line trains. It got bought out by the Metropolitan Railway in 1913, who hoped to connect it to the Circle Line and perhaps run trains further into North London. But the Great Northern Railway blocked them. In 1933 it got taken over by London Transport, who announced in 1935 that it would become part of the Northern Line. This was part of a larger programme to take over a number of branch lines in North London and convert them into tube lines. This is commonly known as the Northern Heights programme. For various reasons, the full Northern Heights programme wasn't completed, and so the Northern City Line continued to be this weird little service. In the 1970s, London Transport decided they weren't actually going to do anything with this, so they handed it over to British Rail in 1975. It's now connected to the Great Northern Main Line at Finsbury Park. Took them long enough. One you might be familiar with, Lord knows I've talked about it enough recently, is the Piccadilly Line branch from Holborn to Aldwych, or Strand as the station was known upon opening. This opened with the rest of the line in 1907. The Piccadilly Line was an amalgamation of a number of other planned tube lines, one of which terminated at Strand. Rather than abandon this branch, Underground Electric Railways of London, who built the line, decided to keep it in the hope of perhaps extending it to the Temple or Waterloo. They never did, and the line was mostly a curious little shuttle between two stations about half a mile apart. It lasted until 1994, when the need to replace the lifts prompted London Transport to call it quits. Now it gets used for filming, tours, and the occasional special event. Out at the far end of the Central Line is, or was, the Epping-Ongar line. I mean, it's still there, but it's not an underground line and hasn't been since 1994. Everything on the Central Line east of Liverpool Street was added during the New Works programme of the 1930s and 40s. Before that, it was a branch line originally built by the Great Eastern Railway. The Great Eastern Railway had this annoying habit of building branch lines in the hope of attracting commuters, only to discover that actually commuters weren't all that bothered. And so it was on the line to Ongar. Attaching this to the Central Line of the Underground was supposed to make it more attractive. A tube line all the way into central London? Why, what could be better? Well, if you've been on the Central Line in summer, lots of things. But I'm being rhetorical here. Humour me. The plan worked for some of the line, but out here the service wasn't much more popular than it had been when the Great Eastern were running the show. What didn't help was that when London Transport took this section over in 1949, they cheaped out. Rather than electrify the line, they ran a steam service between Epping and Ongar, which meant that anyone going from Ongar to central London would have to change trains at Epping. Not very convenient. In 1957 the section was electrified, but the electrification was so weedy that only half-length trains could use it. So, once again, passengers had to change trains. Blakehall Station was so little used that it closed in 1981. In 1994 the whole section was closed. But you can still ride on it. It's now the Epping-Ongar Railway, a heritage line. It's ironic that steam trains were once a downside to this line, and now they're the main attraction. But that's life, I guess. Our final abandoned line didn't even open until 1979. I refer to the Jubilee line branch to Charing Cross. When the Jubilee line first opened, the hope was to extend it through the city and into East London, where it would be used to rejuvenate the all-but-abandoned docks. But money wasn't available and the project was held off. In the 1980s, plans were made to build a massive new development at Canary Wharf. Olympia and York, the developers, approached the government about building a private underground line from Waterloo to Greenwich and Stratford via Canary Wharf. London Transport negotiated a compromise. Rather than a private line, they could pay part of the cost of a Jubilee line extension that would follow a similar route. Both parties agreed. Unfortunately, that meant that the line at Charing Cross was again pointing in the wrong direction. So a new tunnel was dug and the section from Green Park to Charing Cross was abandoned. These days, the old Charing Cross platforms tend to get used, again, for filming. And that, I believe, is it, apart from the odd siding or bit of track not normally in passenger use. There are a few honourable mentions. There was the Tower Subway, a narrow-gauge, cable-hauled railway that ran between Tower Hill and Bermondsey. It only operated for 4 months in 1870 and was never part of the underground network. But it was nevertheless technically the first deep-level tube railway. In fact, the earliest designs for the City and South London Railway were essentially a scaled-up version of the Tower Subway. I don't know whether this counts as part of the Underground or not, but the District line did serve Windsor for a couple of years, from 1883 to 1885. And for a longer period it ran services all the way to Southend. Those lasted from 1910 to 1939, although for much of the route the trains were hauled by steam locomotives belonging to other companies. I suppose I should also mention that while the Northern Heights project was never completed, the branch lines were used for movement of empty rolling stock. And I think that's about it. As I say, there are a few little bits I've not mentioned, bits of track that existed for operational reasons rather than adding substantially to the network of passenger lines. But if there are any that I've missed out on, or that I've ignored but shouldn't have, do let me know. Well, I hope you enjoyed this debatably disused tale from the tube. If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I'd like to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your ever-generous support. You are the takeover to my unprofitable line. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.